Hello everyone, welcome back to Big Strong Book. I am Reed, and today is episode 3 of the Dragonbone Share, and we are going over chapter 4 of the book called Cricket Cage. Now, the 4th chapter of this great book is a little bit of a lore dump, but it's a good one. It's told in a very humorous way. So as was set up in the previous chapters, Simon starts to meet with Dr. Morganis, and Dr. Morganis makes him promise, like, okay, you didn't sweep my, my lab or my area, my quarters today, but you're gonna come back tomorrow, and we're gonna kind of do more of these. We're gonna tell more stories for one another. And he'll educate Simon in a way. And so they come back, and I'll read the beginning of the chapter here, and then I'll go over, all the stuff that is covered in this chapter, because it is quite a bit, and especially for new readers, this really starts to give a lay of the land to all of the minor kingdoms, kind of the states, if you will, of Osten, because, of course, as this story begins, all of Osten is, they're under one rule, but yet there are, there's Naben, there's Hernestir, there's the Rimmersgard, there's lands everywhere, there's the Thirthings, there's I'm gonna look at the map. I forget there are islands to the south as well. The marsh, the Ron lens, I think. My lord, I'm not doing. The Ron, like WRAN, and there's Pereduin and all those other places, and Erkenland, of course. So, so I'll read the beginning here. Morganis was rattling about his workshop, deeply engaged in a search for a missing book. He waved Simon permission to find a cage for the young birds, then went back to his hunt, toppling piles of manuscript and folios like a blind giant in a city of fragile towers. Finding a home for the nestlings was more difficult than Simon had expected. There were plenty of cages, but none seemed quite right. Some had bars so widely spaced that they seemed built for pigs or bears. Others were crammed full of strange objects, none of which resembled animals in the least. Finally, he found one that seemed suitable beneath a roll of shiny cloth. It was knee-high and bell-shaped, made of tightly twisted river reeds, empty but for a layer of sand on the bottom. A small door on the side was held closed by a twist of rope. So he goes in, and we get a little more of some of the animals that and the creatures that Morganis has. But then but then as they kind of get settled in, I really like this quote from Morganis, which is on the page 40 of the mass market version, the 3rd page of this chapter. So he says, a small aversion to menial labor. The doctor cocked an eyebrow. Understandable, but misplaced. One should treasure those humdrum tasks that keep the body occupied but leave the mind and heart unfettered. Well, we should strive to help you through your first day of service. I've thought of a wonderful arrangement. He did a funny little jig step. I talk, you work. Good, eh? And so Simon sweeps, and Morganis regales him with the lore of the land, and he's like, well, I have to tell you about the Hernestiri, the Rimmersmen, the Scythi. And he puts a lot of things in context, because, of course, Simon, he's a scullion. He's the moon calf. He spends all of his time within this little castle, and his mind is starting to work its way through the events that are greater than himself. And again, this has been a theme that's been continuing along in every single chapter. Simon's worldview And indeed, I mean, this isn't giving anything away, I think, for new readers, but of course, especially this first volume is the heart and soul of it is Simon gaining experiences, and the world is opening before him in such a fantastic way. And we're still kind of in the stage right now where, you know, we assume that Simon, you know, he's not just going to be sweeping floors in the Hayholt for the rest of his life. He's not going to be doing this for the rest of the story. I mean, this book is almost 800 pages long. You know, he's not going to be hearing stories. He's going to be taking in this information, and then it's going to inform his worldview later on. And so Morganus does a very simple thing to really put things into context. He says, the day today is Dror's Day, the 15th, 16th? No, 15th of November, and the year is 1163, is it not? I think so. Excellent. Do put that over the stool, will you? So the 1163rd year since what? And Simon thinks, and he doesn't really know. He's not sure, but then he remembers whenever he's in the market, they always say the 1163rd year since the founding. And Morganus is like, great, so the founding, do you know what the founding is? Simon doesn't know, of course. And so it's the founding since the Nabonai Imperium was founded. So we got a little bit of this, I think, in chapter 2. Morganus talks about the Naban Empire as being this kind of huge state of men, you know, a long, long time ago. And of course, Naban is still around. And Simon points this out because, again, the scope of history for him is kind of being unfurled before him, because he interrupts Morganus and he's like, wait a minute, sir, or probably not sir, whatever he calls Morganus, but he just says, wait a minute, Naban is a tiny country. It's part of King John's empire. It's part of King John's rule. How could it have been so big? And Morganus tells him, you know, history, it ebbs and flows. He says, yeah, that, young man, Morganus said, is what we call history. Empires have a tendency to decline, kingdoms to collapse. Given 1,000 years or so, anything can happen. And so he starts to tell Simon a little bit more about the Scythi. So and again, for first-time readers, this is really getting a crucial look into this almost, I mean, the best way to compare them for newcomers is certainly if you have read anything like The Lord of the Rings, any series like that where there is a quasi-immortal race. So similar to, you know, the elves of Middle-earth, the Scythi are essentially immortal, though they do age. You know, there are younger ones and older ones, but, you know, they kind of like elves in Middle-earth, they can only really die by violence or by choice or, you know, some other affliction. But even though the Scythi are similar in that regard to the elves and the lore and the history and all of that, they are very different too. And that's significantly where it diverges from Lord of the Rings. And so he begins to tell him about, you know, the fair folk, and he says that, you know, the fair folk, they used to, he's like, they've been here for so long, who knows how long they could be here after all of humans are dead. And he mentions that they ruled over Azua, what the Hayholt used to be. But Scythie and Man, as he says, found a sort of balance. They even traded things. And so we get little hints and pieces of other parts of Ostenard, like men brought spies and dyes from the southern islands, or precious stones from the Grinnisbog Mountains in Hernistir. In return, they received beautiful things from the Earl King's coffers. So the Earl King, being the king over the Scythie, and then of course Simon, I think being the teenage boy he is, he wants to know about the Rimmersmen. Like, the Rimmersmen came, and then all of this great conflict happened, and so he gets into that, and he begins to go on about like the Nabonai rulers like Tiageris, Crexus the Goat, and Fortis, and then eventually the Nabonai Empire, the Nabonai Imperium, they stretch from the south all the way to the north, but then they start to withdraw from the north, kind of as the Rimmersmen push in from the Frostlands. So they push down, and eventually it gets to the point when, let me just make sure I have all my facts right here. Yes. So we also get a little more tidbit about the Hernistiri. So it says, now the people of Hernistir, proud, fierce people whom the Nabonai imperators never really conquered, were not at all willing to bend their necks to Rimmersgard. They were horrified by what the Northerners were doing to the Scythie. The Hernistiri had been of all men the closest to the fair folk. There is still visible today the mark of an ancient trade road between this castle and the Tag at Hernistadrock. The Lord of Hernistir and the Earl King made a desperate compact, and for a while held the northern tide at bay. So this friction, I don't want to call it a schism because it's not a schism, but it is friction between the Hernistiri and the Rimmersmen. It is a very real and obviously deeply rooted animosity that these people have towards one another. The Hernistiri and the Rimmersmen, I believe I'm correct in remembering this, harbor little goodwill towards one another when they first, meet each other. There's always that standoffish quality. And so Morghenus mentions that this conflict, so you have the Rimmersmen coming down from the north, the Nabonai Empire, receding, and you have they're horrified by what the Rimmersmen are doing to the Scythie. They're being brutal towards them. And so you have a conflict, I don't believe, between the Naban Empire. Yeah, so again, if I'm not correct in what I'm about to say, leave a comment below just to correct me. I believe that the Naban Empire, they weren't involved in that conflict, the Summerfield battle. They just withdrew to the south, and then they were kind of out of that conflict. And the main conflict was between believe it was between just the Hernistiri and the Rimmersmen. Based on what I'm reading here, I could be wrong though. I had always thought, reading the series, that the Nabonai Empire had more of a conflict, but I might be wrong. So anyway, at the very least, it's Hernistiri and the Scythie against the Rimmersmen. But of course, we're now introduced to another wrinkle in the political sphere of Ostenard, and that is the Thirthings. The Thirthings are, for readers new to the series, the closest fantasy counterpart that I can think of off the top of my head is the Dothraki in A Song of Ice and Fire. They are, grasslands, tribal people. Um, and so in the Battle of Samrath, they kind of come in on the flank, and 10,000 Hernastiri, I believe, are killed. Yeah, and yeah, when he says the defense was broken, the Hernastiri chariot smashed the white stag of the house of Hern, trampled into the bloody dirt. And he gives a little bit of a hint at the end of the story about the Earl King of the Scythi, the Earl King's son. Who is the Earl King, and who is his son? Well, that's a read and find out moment. But then at the end of this chapter, when Simon leaves Morgania's quarters, again, he when he looks at the castle, he sees history around him, and it's interesting. One of his observations, it says, this paragraph towards the end of the chapter: "Look at this castle," he thought, "old and dead, stone pressed upon lifeless stone, a pile of rocks inhabited by small-minded creatures. But it had been different once. Great things had happened here. Horns had blown, swords had glittered, great armies had crashed against each other and rebounded like the waves of the Kinslade battering the Seagate wall. Hundreds of years had passed, but it seemed to Simon it was happening just now only for him, while the slow, witless folk who shared the castle with him crawled past, thinking of nothing but the next meal and a nap directly afterwards. Idiots." Such a teenage boy thing to think, like, oh, they don't care about the history, oh, they're just idiots. But yeah, he's slowly, bit by bit, he's beginning to feel the weight of history upon his shoulders. And which is, I'm sure that's something that, all of us readers, I'm sure most of us harbor some love, especially epic fantasy. A lot of us, I'm assuming, harbor love for world history. And yeah, you kind of get that impression, like, all these places that you go, people have been here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and all the great things that have happened in these places. And what we may be going through that day, or what we may be seeing around us, is something that's just so mundane. And it's that desire for great things. But of course, what does Simon wish for? Does he wish for battles? Does he wish for conflict? He's drawn towards conflict, and that's an interesting thing to kind of, I guess, keep in mind in some respect as the book progresses. And so in terms of spoiler talk, this is a lore-based chapter, but it's more like just straight history. Not a whole, and the big questions of Earl King's son, and that will be, of course, answered later on in this book, and it's fairly clear what it's talking about. It's not up for a whole lot of speculation. At least in the new series, there's not a whole lot in this chapter that's lingering questions for readers who are rereading, in my mind. I could be wrong, but that's just reading through it. That's the way I see it. So yeah, no big spoiler section for today. So yeah, if you've read Chapter 4, Cricket Cage, let me know what you think, and I will see you guys tomorrow for Chapter 5.